Okay, perfect. So I'm sure everyone is aware that we have made a good bit of progress with our API stability on a whole, where we are clear of like what is stable APIs versus unstable APIs, and we have a mechanism that is hopefully going to be that will be released actually in 1.22 that will help users like scope their API usage according to stability. So that was our biggest priority when kicking off the enhancement subgroup. And when we got like tentative approval from the TOC, it was still from a point of view of like, how can we be effective and how do we do that, right? So we came up with like three like clear sentences of how to show value. One of which was like cleaning up existing features and ensuring new features fit our standard. Um, in theory, we haven't really adjusted our standard for like stability phases, but I believe, at least from the work that we have attempted to do, it seems like there isn't a high return of investment for like cleaning up existing features as of now, unless it's like related to a high priority work stream, like getting it ready for ambient.
Yeah.
So we haven't been able to make any progress there, but what we have been able to do is make sure that folks who care about like the features they're using can indeed use those features by opting in to like a stable API channel. So I'm curious, what are your thoughts on like where we are in like this goal? Um, and is there anything else we should do, or yeah, what are your thoughts there? Especially based on the process we've been through and the experience we have had since writing this goal. Because I think us then was very naive, and now, a couple months later, we see how things go. Cool. Well, I guess
And I guess this is mostly a question for Eric, if you have thoughts to weigh.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I don't have the best answer off the top of my head. Um,
it
I
seems. Go ahead. Sorry.
no, I think the the work has all been good. I have no issues with that. I know it's become some of these become very hard to do, right? I know you've been trying to get more developers on board to help with some of that, and I know, you know, the ambient stuff has hindered that in some ways. Um, I'm trying to think if there's any specifics, right?
A good example is the deprecation of the Istio in cluster operator.
Yeah,
We have no developer for that. However, Louis and a couple other folks have said that once Ambient makes it to beta, we may get developer bandwidth for that. Um, so I guess maybe time will tell. And in the next TOC meeting, I did plan to raise like, hey, what are your thoughts for like prioritizing getting rid of this? Yeah.
right. I mean, that certainly seems to be a high priority item that we haven't got to yet. Um, at the same time, IBM uses it. I think I made this comment before, right? So,
Yes.
um, coming up with a replacement and or a migration strategy for how we're using it is important.
Indeed. And we wouldn't deprecate. I think when we say deprecate or remove, we are thinking of doing all of that. Like we
Yeah,
can't just remove it.
right. We can't just remove it, and we sort of right. I mean, this one's kind of a hard one too because we have sort of deprecated it. We've sort of been telling people, you know, it's not the best pick, But yeah, whether we've officially deprecated it or not, I don't know.
Yeah.
But I mean, to deprecate it means we do need to have some sort of idea for a story going ahead. So coming up with that sort of is an issue. But yeah, that's probably the key, one of the key items that I get pulled into from both sides, right?
Yeah, it's unfortunate that we started telling users it's deprecated, and then there has been like no action afterwards.
Right.
And I know Mitch, he softened his deprecation language in the presentation he did in KubeCon EU. But I think similar to IBM, I'm sure there are people that have a little anxiety around like what's happening here.
Yep. Yeah, and coming up with something, and then I don't know how the OpenShift, what they're calling their sale operator right now, how that may or may not play into this going forward as well. It's got some different CRDs, but a lot of similar ideas.
Interesting. I hadn't heard about that at all yet.
Yeah, if you go out to
I'm
Istio
following.
ecosystem, it's out there.
Okay.
So I've done a little bit of playing with it. It's interesting. I mean, and from their standpoint, right, they're trying to do this so that it works on communities as well as OpenShift. So, which leads to some drawbacks, I think. But I'm curious to see how that goes forward.
Cool. Okay.
But that's that's sort of the an operator thing. And I know in terms of some other features, I know there's been some movement, right? I know John has pushed forward the distroless stuff, and I believe there was another one recently as well.
I don't have context on the distroless. What's happening there?
I think it got moved up to, I want to say, did it get moved from alpha to beta? I'd have to go back and look.
Saw the issue hadn't updated recently. I can go find it.
Cool. Okay. And then we had one in terms of the telemetry API as well. But it seems like instead of us going out to find these, a better signal is like if someone either start working on it or brings it up in the community. So that's a learning we have as a subgroup.
Yeah, so there was a recent PR to update distroless to stable is actually what it was.
Yeah, I just found I dropped a link in the chat.
Yeah, and then there's gateway API stuff as well. That was the other one.
Cool.
Yeah, the gamma stuff is also good for the
Yep.
up and stable because it's been adopted and it's working. So it's good that that's stable upstream. So hopefully it'll be imminently stable. I haven't double checked if it's merged yet, but that will be another thing that we can hopefully get
Right.
stable in Istio itself soon.
Yeah, so distroless was, I think, beta to stable instead of alpha to beta in your notes.
Cool.
Thank you. Oh. Okay. Let's see. Seems like gamma is the most exciting one here. That will have hopefully developer attention if we do decide to push that. Yeah.
Yeah, gamma, ambient seem to be the biggies right now.
Cool. Sounds good. Okay. So it seems like there is good candidates. And cluster operator is the least liked, the least momentum. And it will be interesting for us to apply pressure on the TOC to be intentional about that, or at least allocate someone to own that. Cool. Okay. This is more promising than I thought initially. And then going to the other goal that we had was around like clarifying the status of every feature. Um, we haven't been able to, we haven't done much work here, and it doesn't seem like folks have complaints either. Like we had like the Istio APIs that there's no momentum, but we got clarity there in terms of like there's not going to have any additional changes. So let's denote it as stable. But besides that, there haven't been any other examples I can think of where folks are unsure of like a feature status or is demanding for us to like review the status of a specific feature. Have you all been able to think of any examples?
Not that I can think of anyway, off the top of my head.
I haven't looked into this, but I'm curious about that note where it says some features aren't clearly beta or stable.
Yes. A good example was the Istio APIs, like the networking APIs. They are definitely a priority and it's like well used right now. But there isn't any clear ways to improve it or any desire to improve it, especially since there's Gamma and other like gateway API other activity upstream that will eventually replace the Istio APIs. So yeah, so it was unclear of are those stable now or are we still keeping it beta? And we did get a conclusion there where we said they're going to be stable. They have been promoted to V1. There was other confusion around like the envoy filter and the wasm plugin that was sort of stuck in alpha, and we have accepted those as like permanently unstable based on the nature of it, and we are okay knowing that if we want to not use those, we have a mechanism to make sure like our cluster is scoped from not using those experimental features, which is the release channels.
That's where the time part of it is included, I guess, in terms of deciding when to deprecate something that's permanently unstable.
Unfortunately, no, because those APIs, they're well used as well. So I think the problem that we have with all of these features is like Istio usage, and we don't want to impact existing users. So we are either stuck supporting the super unstable APIs, and I think that's just the reality of those APIs where I don't necessarily see a deprecation path in the future. But I've heard conversations where folks are looking at ways to like create a stable subset of like, is it envoy filter? I think. Yeah.
And one more question, you might not know the answer to it, but it's just something I'm thinking about is what are we like inflating the term stable? Because initially I thought stable might mean like consistent usage and yeah, the features being used by people, right?
Yeah.
But what else could it mean? Like when we say that there is a lot of Istio usage, but it's still considered unstable, I'm not sure I understand that.
Yeah. That is a key point. And unfortunately, we are, I think, inflating how we manage our features overall. Just because there is a lot of usage of experimental feature doesn't, that shouldn't be the reason we keep it there. I think we should be a little more prescriptive and
Yeah.
guide development. Yeah.
I think we need to better identify what the deprecation story is from the various stages, if you will.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I think we do have, some stuff out there. If we go back to, the one page that you edited very early on with the, I think it was you anyway that, what does, alpha, beta, blah, blah, blah mean in terms of the various things and, deprecation, right? Whether you could deprecate it in one release, two releases, whether we would have a migration path or not, right? So
Yes.
sort of goes back to the same with the operator. If you can just simply say that it's going to be deprecated and go away in two releases, that's a different story than, we will have some migration path. And maybe it's 4 releases, right?
Yeah.
Deprecation from stable versus a deprecation from experimental. So
Yeah. And I think it's really hard for us to be like in 2 releases, this would be completely moved for across the board. At least where we are, we have to have like a really fleshed out deprecation story per feature or whatever it is that we're discussing to make sure that we really understand the usage and come up with that migration path.
I think to understand the usage part is that seems like be the trickiest, right? Because
Yeah.
it feels like sometimes this happens where we mention deprecation and it's not really an issue until we like go to do it or consider it seriously, right? And then all of a sudden, oh, it's used, and then yeah. But I'm not sure we have a good way of sourcing that information to begin with.
Right.
So it's a tough problem, but it's one of the biggest ones.
Yeah. User feedback is really tough. And we're out here making decisions without it.
Yeah, I think that was, I'll go back to, I think when Brian Avery was trying to do, the stuff with the enhancements repo. I mean, I think that was part of what, he was trying to do at that point was be able to, better articulate what the stages meant. How do we, get the message out to users? Hopefully they read, change notes and release notes and things like that, which, hey, we're going to deprecate something. Please let us know if it's an issue, right? Because a lot of that, unfortunately, we don't necessarily get. And part of the reason I think is, obviously, the more users you have, the better off. But a lot of users are using different vendor releases as well. And so it's hard to get some of that feedback from those vendors back into the community.
That's a very, very good point. You got to think about that kind of like a middleman situation.
Yep. So
Yeah.
maybe the TOC needs to come up with something better there in terms of being able to get stuff back. I know Mitch is sort of the survey person, and if we can come up with something that we can do to better get the user representation of various things. But
Even like surveys, I mean that definitely is dependent on engaged users taking the time and also understanding what they're actually using, which is kind of a high bar, unfortunately. I feel like I think this is already in the deprecation instructions. I think it's in the Istio ones, but maybe I'm getting mixed up with the Kubernetes ones. There's basically a way to turn a feature off by default without necessarily entirely removing it yet. So like as part of the deprecation process, like after you've announced that like, hey, this thing is deprecated, it's going away, then you can like ship a release where there's a way to turn it back on if you still need it, but that gets people screaming about it if there actually is widespread usage. So it's hopefully a like slightly longer process, but helps substantially lower the risk of like deleting a thing and then finding out later that a bunch of people need it. So like that, yeah.
that's a good idea. I
Lets
haven't
you still
thought of.
turn it back on if you really, really need it, and then gets you posting upstream about like, hey, don't remove this thing.
I like that. And right now it's still I think babies, they're users. Like they don't want to do anything that will make them scream. But maybe they do need to scream at us so we can get more insights.
Yep. Yeah, screaming isn't necessarily a bad thing, right?
Mhm.
That's something else that just came to mind, Eric, when you mentioned vendors. Are there like a ton of vendors that exist? And do we have like good lines of communication with them, or are they hooked into the community? And should it be our job to reach out to vendors that we come across and build that relationship?
I think it should be. And in the telemetry API example, Imran actually did an effort where we compiled a list of vendors that we know are pretty active. And he reached out to like different representatives in the community and ask, hey, is it possible that you collect any usage data on telemetry API and can you share it? Google was the only one that actually collected it in a way that they can share easily. Microsoft, we are trying to work on our collection so that we can share, but at least it got the conversation going. And in a way, we were able to identify like the point of contact, the best person to talk to in the vendor company. But it doesn't seem like vendors have like either the infrastructure in place or is thinking in that way of like, hey, we should probably share our usage data with upstream so that upstream could do a better job.
I think that that's still a good step though, because even if they don't have like infrastructure set up to have some formalized collection of user data, I'm sure they're still getting it through their vendor product tickets, like on-call tickets or issues they come across, or just even having that line of communication where they respond back to it's essentially data, but like, hey, this broke, and they have you as a connector, us, whoever's reaching out to the vendor to talk to about the issues they're facing. That's all data right there. And I think just building that relationship is a good way to start getting that. It's a good job that we're actually making progress on that side.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I'm curious how we could either make sure we make continuous progress and make it in a way that anyone who wants to work on a feature or get insight can actually invest it.
Yeah, it's only good for the project as a whole too, right? Like you're getting more community involvement, more perspectives, right? So that's
Yeah.
a very open sourcey way of getting the data that we want. Because obviously it's not just Microsoft and Google and IBM, right? So I think any way we can get more of those vendors and users into the fold, that's only going to improve things and make it easier for the main contributors. Then hopefully we get more contributors, right? So
I agree. And maybe when different vendors or like just developers open issues or open PRs that is trying to make a change, we can do a better job of asking like, do you have any data to support this?
good point. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. So let's see. So that's pretty much, I think we only had 2 goals, although we aim for 3, but let's see what else. I think that is a good discussion, and I think I've gotten a lot of feedback from you all where I can go synthesize it and figure out what is the next action item or plan for the subgroup as a whole. I really appreciate your support to date, and I hope that we can continue to like have positive impact on cleaning up Istio in a way that makes sense. Yeah. If anyone else has anything to add, if not, we can get the remaining time back.
Appreciate you running this, Winnie.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Have a good one.
Take care, y'all. See ya.
All right, bye.